Alrighty. So joining me today is Eric Bess. Eric is a practicing representational artist. He's currently a doctoral student at the Institute for Doctoral Studies in the Visual Arts, and he also writes on art, culture, and philosophy. Really excited to have him on. So today we're going to be talking about Eric's path in art, as well as our consciousness, our suffering, and how that ties into our need to create and creativity itself, as well as a ton of other topics. So without further ado, here's our conversation. I hope you enjoy. A lot of your background is in, philosophy and art, which I think is really interesting. So first, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your background and, why you went this path?
Yes, I've always been interested in art ever since I was a very young boy. My grandmother tells me she actually quit her job at a daycare to take care of me as a young boy, and she babysat from her home. And every like parent has a bias toward their child, I guess. But my grandmother said that she would have us all draw pictures, and at 2 years old, I was drawing a little bit better than the other kids, and she thought, maybe there's something here. And she began to encourage me to draw. I saw this drawing I did when I was 2 years old. It was a drawing of Michael Jackson. And it was not good at all. But she said that I was able to see certain things I was able to establish certain things in my drawings that the other kids my age just weren't able to do. And she encouraged it. And that encouragement is really what started off the rest of my journey. I even say sometimes that it's almost like I need to do art in order to feel like I am worthy of existing almost. It's so ingrained in who I am, I think, because it was encouraged to do it at such an early age, and I was always praised when I was doing it, that I needed to do it. Otherwise, I don't feel like I'm whole. I'm sure a lot of psychiatrists would have a lot of things to say about that.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's so when you're dealing with it at that early age, maybe it's just something that's just there. You can't really put your finger on it. Just kind of always it's just a part of you at that point.
Yes, it's so ingrained in who I am. I even remember going to like kindergarten class and drawing pictures of Ninja Turtles, and all of the other kids saying, "Oh, wow, that's so cool. You should draw me a picture." And then I would draw them a picture. And it's just always been that way my whole life. I didn't even want to be an artist. I wanted to be a doctor, actually. And then I wanted to be an archaeologist. And then I wanted to be a doctor again. It was always something else until I entered college. And then I realized in college that I wasn't good at anything. So I went back to what I was good at, which was drawing. And
that's really interesting. Did you put it aside all those years? Say like elementary, middle school, or whatever you were drawing. Did you have any moments in there where we just kind of put it aside and then maybe you just picked it back up later for some reason?
Never. I always drew, and it was mostly cards or pictures of famous people and stuff like that. Like in middle school, I was, this is kind of embarrassing, but I was obsessed with Tupac.
It's okay.
So I had these magazines and CD covers and stuff like that, and I would just copy those images over and over and over again. And interestingly enough, when I was finished, I would take them to my grandmother and show her so she could say, "Oh, wow, that's just amazing." And I would go back to my room with a big smile on my face. I do another one. I did this constantly. Comic cards, comic books, things like that. I would just copy stuff over and over again.
Okay, so then you have this academic background in art. The one thing about this, though, with art and philosophy is I mean, you're not making money, which I think is really interesting. With artists especially, it can be really fascinating people because it's not about comfort, because you're not going to have that. Like, I know a lot of artists that have these really interesting backgrounds because they really had to scrape by to pursue this. I mean, did you have that experience?
Uh,
You must have like a passion that exceeds. It's just always interesting, but
yes, I think I've definitely endured all of those things, and you were right. I don't make much money, and I definitely don't do it for the money. I just I really love it. I just love it. I was um talking to someone the other day, and we were talking about pursuing jobs and careers and things like that. And I said the perfect job is the job that you can do and you don't need to be paid for it. Like, you just want to be the best at it. You just want you love it. Being the best at it is almost like being the best version of yourself. But then you have to also, you know, qualify what being the best is at it. Um, but a lot of artists that I've come to know have, I think not only a lot of artists, but a lot of people who pursue advanced degrees as well, they experience a lot of hardship in pursuing these things, because it takes a toll on you mentally, physically, and financially. It really it beats you into submission. It tries to like weed out the people who are not built for it. Um, and I find it happen a lot. A lot of people say, I don't want to do this. There's been quite a few times, like I'm in the middle of a PhD program, and there's been quite a few times where I've said to myself, you know what, maybe this isn't a good idea. maybe maybe I should just do something else instead. Not even like not do art, but maybe a PhD isn't necessary. And in the United States, it's not necessary. It's not a terminal degree in art. An MFA is, and I have an MFA, Master of Fine Arts degree. It's considered a terminal degree. It's the equivalent of a doctorate in studio art. I, like an idiot, thought it would be a good idea to get a doctorate degree in the theory of art, which is where philosophy comes in. Um, and it's really tested me in ways I didn't think it would.
the thing is just, with these struggles though, and it puts you in a place that maybe you wouldn't have knowingly went into, because, I think the struggles, when you look at, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that pyramid, it shows like the basic functions in the bottom, and then you get self-actualization on the top. I don't know if that's, really accurate, because I think, a lot of that self-actualization happens when you're in that struggle mode. And you're like, crap, am I going to be sleeping under a bridge tonight? What's going to happen tomorrow? Because then you're really engaged in life. You're like, you're really intensely involved, and that can put you in situations that can be really interesting, because if, like, say you went a route. I mean, I'm not smacking on it, but just say you went the route of, something safe, where you have a really stable income, and then all your needs are met, and everything's just kind of this, kind of lukewarm, which I'm not saying is bad, but you wouldn't knowingly put yourself in these situations, where you can really, just these odd situations that can really test your character, and put you in places that you wouldn't knowingly choose.
Oh yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. One of the chapters in my dissertation is on Nietzsche and the idea of the master, or mastery, being a master at something. And he says almost exactly everything that you just said, that we as human beings have a tendency to take a safe route. He actually even said it. He predicted what he called the last man, which he said would just be people who made themselves so comfortable that they just became big heads. That they never put themselves in uncomfortable situations. They never turned toward what was uncomfortable. But that uncomfortable, what makes us uncomfortable is so necessary for us to become into the people we're supposed to become. And he said, in this way, you should develop a love of fate, because our experiences or existence itself just sort of pours out what we perceive to be good and bad. And we turn away from the bad and we turn toward the good, but that actually limits us. If we instead love fate, that is existence as it pours itself out toward to us, then we'll develop how we're supposed to develop.
That's interesting.
It is. It's very interesting. It's a very interesting idea. And he even says that in this way, we come to create ourselves, not as if we're creating ourselves, but our perception of the world becomes artistic because we're allowing our fate to mold us into what we'll become. Outside of that, though, if we're only going toward what's pleasurable, in a way, we're being cocky, and not in a good way, as opposed to being confident. We're being cocky in that we know the answers for ourselves. What ends up happening is we don't create anything at all, other than the big head we believe ourselves to be. And he thought this was very dangerous. He actually said it leads to what he calls herd mentality, where no one thinks for themselves and everyone just parrots one another. And then they end up brutalizing each other.
Yeah, and so the same way that people gravitate towards seeking comfort and all that, the easy path. Do you think there's also a propensity in people to seek that pain? This may be something that happens, when we're young, growing up, we suffer some kind of trauma. We've all probably been through a million different things, and so the difference when we're young, that is we don't know how to deal with it at that point. We internalize things in really weird ways. There's it becomes our internal dialogue because it keeps repeating over and over and over, oftentimes, because we're just so confused and we don't know what to do and all that stuff, and it just sticks, and that becomes part of who we are. It becomes like a veil, and it becomes how we express ourselves and how we internalize ourselves. Yeah, just in how we create and everything, it informs all of that. For me anyways, I went through this 30-year kind of like dark night of the soul where things are like just really sucky. It's just that process of trying to taking that step back and analyzing it, like with your philosophy, spend so much time analyzing things. It seems extremely useful because you're taking that bird's eye view and looking at things, especially like the human condition, and trying to understand it. That's not something we're really taught to do. It didn't take me till so long to figure it out, just like separate internal dialogue from me. Anyways, I forgot my question. I think it was on just suffering in general. So how do you see that? I mean, do you think there's a tendency to seek that?
I think I had a period where I was very depressed as well. Just everything seemed to suck. And I really I hated being alive. And I went and I researched a bunch of books, and it was through books that I came across the idea of getting rid of the ego. Nietzsche, though, would disagree with that wholeheartedly. And this, of course, is not to say that he's right, but he would say that one of the reasons that we come to experience that is because we're beating up our ego. We have failed to love ourselves, or we have failed to learn to love ourselves. And so we never learn how to love existence, a love of fate. We never learn how to do it because we're always attacking our egos and ourselves. And for him, this has been a unfortunate thing that's happened throughout the history of human beings. We would much rather prefer that we be the hero of our own story, but being a hero for him requires that we love ourselves and that we actually look forward to that depression, because it's going to shape and mold. And when it begins to happen, we get excited at the abyss we're going to experience. As a matter of fact, he says it's only by going into the deepest, darkest abyss that you can reach your highest mountains. That the peak and the abyss are one. Interesting statement. But the depression that I went through really brought me into who I am today. And so though I may not agree with everything he says, I think that there is a certain level of truth to it, because sometimes, I mean, I even hate to say this, but sometimes I do want to have something like that happen to me again, because I know if it does, it's those moments where you really question sincerely. And through those questions, you come deeper into yourself. So I go deeper into what it means to be an artist when I have those fits of sadness. It's what the ancient Greeks called the muses. You're made to be creative. It's not something that you come up with yourself, which is sort of like what the idea of the genius became for artists with the Enlightenment movement, which became a very scientific movement. They attempted to remove spirituality and religion from a lot of things. They tried to make ethics and the mind and physics all very scientific. But in doing so, they also said that the genius was someone who was original in and of themselves, that they created the law. An individual person would create the law for other people to follow. But the ancients would say something different, that it's not something that genius, for instance, or creativity isn't something that springs from an individual. It springs from elsewhere, like inspiration, for lack of a better word. I don't even know if this answers your question. I feel like I've gotten off topic.
No, yeah, it's just this is one thing I've been trying to figure out is, is art, I mean, for me anyways, this is just my mental process or journey, but is it like am I trying to validate my existence within this world, or am I trying to escape? I just had this concept that it was, taking me away somewhere, but actually it's drawing me more within. And as you said before, when you know yourself, when you master yourself, that's when you're really truly going into the source. Mm-hmm. So I always thought it was somewhere outside of me. I had to reach somewhere outside of me, but it's really within.
Yes, yep, I agree wholeheartedly. I think that the first question you asked is such a great question too. Like, am I doing art to get away from the world or to be present in it? What a great question. That is a fantastic question. That's really all I have to say about that. What a great question. It's one of those questions that doesn't have an absolute answer, at least as far as we know. And I think in the same way, like Nietzsche would say that the abyss and the peak are one, it's possible that the process of creating is both in that question. In that, you're turning, in creating, you're turning away from the world, you're turning within, but you're also present in what you're creating. There's so much materiality with creating. You're picking up your pencil or your pen, or you're mixing your paints, you're preparing your surface, you're interacting with the world. It can be very meditative. And yet you have to go within, maybe not have to, but maybe you do. Maybe you have to go within in order to create. Even if you're just doing like a basic still life rendering and you're looking at a photograph or a still life setup in front of you and you're just going to copy it, you still, like, that requires that you go within and you ask yourself, where am I going to put it on the canvas? How do I want it arranged? How am I going to make my light affect my setup? And then it also requires that you ask questions of your environment. How is this object interacting with this one? How is that object affecting this one? How is the environment affecting my appearance of the whole? It's like a moment where subjectivity and objectivity become one, which is how most creativity happens, or when things are just created, period. Two things, usually opposites, have to come together, coalesce, and then something new comes out of it. Seems to be a law of this world of ours.
Yeah, could you expand on that a bit? Just the two opposites that need to come together.
Yeah, I think about the yin and yang symbol, where we have the sort of, for lack of a better word, a negative type of existence and a positive type of existence. But both are necessary. Both are necessary for things to continue. It's the same thing with life as far as human beings are concerned. You have a man and a woman come together, which at least up until recent history, they were considered opposites. And those two are necessary for procreation to occur. There's, even if I think about, in a way we're talking about psychology a lot. And if I think of Freud, who ironically enough said that if he were a philosopher, he would be Nietzsche, which is an interesting statement. He says that as far as our dreams are concerned, that our dreams take elements, or our unconscious mind will take elements from things we experience in the real world that are not necessarily the same. So they are going to contrast with one another, and they coalesce these elements into something new, some type of a dream, really, dream content. Of course, he says a lot of other weird things as far as why the unconscious mind is doing that. But he says that is not creative. That's just the work that the dream does. He calls it dream work. So dream work takes dream elements, coalesces them into dream content, into something completely new. And it does this in an attempt to hide our desires that are not welcome in in society. But I feel like as far back as we can think, or as far back as we know, we have considered the opposites of things. To like when they coalesce is when we experience some type of creativity. So even with our own depression, when we enter something deep and dark about ourselves, when we enter our own abyss, is also the moment at which we gain the potential to reach a higher understanding of ourselves. It's by going down that we go up. And in going up, we create ourselves, or at least we present the possibility of creating ourselves into something new, something better, something more authentic as far as who we are as human beings.
Yeah, that's great. That's the thing about, creating, in any capacity, especially I think in the art world, because a lot of artists have this tendency to be contrarians. They have their own set of views and things like that. You're engaging with the world. Artists aren't passive people. They're taking life, and trying to mold it. And in this world right now, I think we're in a place where we're stepping out of this utilitarian mindset. When you talk about the Enlightenment and these these kind of materialistic ways of thinking, the scientific ways, scientific rationalism and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that got put to the side, and people weren't focusing on really engaging with that internal self, to where trying to understand the implications of your thoughts and what they're doing. It's more external instead of internal.
Mm-hmm.
And especially religion and everything like that, since Emperor Constantine, Christianity has gone through that same phase where it was more of an external thing, because
Mm-hmm.
they twisted it that way, where it's not internal. Jesus talked about forgiveness, and you must forgive a person, not 7 times, but 7 times 70. He was talking to one of his disciples that asked him, because he was in this quandary. Said, you have to forgive and forgive and forgive. You have to forgive the unforgivable. Well, why
Mm-hmm.
would you do that? And so, it's like in art too, you have to question, what am I doing here with this? What am I doing here with that? You're really engaging. And that's kind of like the foundation for a lot of this. It's a foundation for growth.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's just passive, the passive existence.
Yes, yeah, I agree. I feel like the question, more than anything, I think it's the precursor to creativity, because the question provides the possibility for things that may be opposites to coalesce. And one thing I see with our time that's problematic with not only artists, but just people in general, is the reluctance to ask questions. Everyone wants to make it appear as if they know the answer. And everyone is arguing with one another because they're right. They're presuming that they have absolute knowledge about a subject. Which, why would you even want that? The same people who presume, or at least behave as if they have absolute knowledge about a subject, are the same people who suggest that there needs to be change. But those are irreconcilable. I don't know how you can suggest that you and all of the people you agree with have absolute knowledge about a subject, and that somehow there should also be change. Because change just does not exist in an absolute, at least as far as definition is concerned. Right? Like there has to be some type of wiggle room, and that wiggle room comes with a question. where one side, even if we're talking about politics, where one side comes to the other side and says, instead of saying you're wrong and I'm right, they
Yeah.
say, well, what can you expound upon that? Or what do you mean by that? Or, what exactly do you think is going to be the end of that? And how do you think it'll affect people in the long run? To ask that question as a gotcha question, but with sincerity.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's almost like endemic throughout our whole society now. It's not fun. It's not pretty.
Uh,
You know, it's weird, and it's okay to be wrong. You know, that's how we learn.
yeah, and I think that's a result of like the whole Enlightenment way of thinking, where there isn't any. The question is never turned within, which I think leads to like a gotcha question. Right? We never ask questions of ourselves, like what do I actually believe, and
Yeah,
is it authentic? Is that what I authentically believe, or do I just believe that because everyone around me believes it? Like these, I think these are real questions that need to be asked. And it's by way of the question that then the space opens up for art for art to occur. Without the question, there's really no, I mean, what, oh, there's no, there's nothing that can happen.
yeah, that's true. You know, you can see it definitely in the arts nowadays. It's kind of interesting because, I mean, if you're interested in movies and film, it's like, holy moly, where is the creativity
Yeah.
gone? And just in anything like music, and as you know, that external focus, and it drives people. You know, as you said before in a podcast a while ago, what you do most of, that's what you're going to become good at.
Mhm.
And I like that statement. It's just focused on the external, like it's just the power of things. You know, I think that's a lot of it, like people want that power, and that they're feeding that ego, that that external, way of looking at the world. It's not internal, it's all external, and they're focusing on the external and too much. We're kind of in this weird quandary. I don't know, like, do you feel that it's just scary but interesting to watch? To watch the extremes going on, it's just so fascinating.
Yes, yep, exactly. I think that's the perfect word for it. Extreme. I said absolute, but it's the extremes, butting up against the extreme and identifying with the extreme, and not questioning it at all. And I think, like you said, in art, you're seeing that in movies and film, where it's more about the external. It's more about like taking something like X-Men or the Avengers or something and just remaking it like 8 times so that you can get more money. Not to say that those movies are bad. I actually haven't seen them, but I think it gives an example to our point, in that the creativity is not necessarily there. It's taking an old idea and just rehashing it repeatedly. And it seems like the only question that's really asked is, how can we draw this out further? Which is not necessarily a bad question, but I don't know if it's a question that opens up a space large enough for creativity to occur or for creation to happen. And so that's what we're getting. We're getting a lot of remakes, or we're getting a lot of music that just has the same content over and over and over again. And in a way, it is starting to feel, maybe not even starting, but it feels a lot like indoctrination. You, and you become what you practice. I was talking to my wife not too long ago about our imaginations and music, and I was listening to an instrumental song, and I was saying how maybe 20 years ago I would listen to these songs because they were nice to listen to. And I had gotten to a point in my life where I did not care to hear music with words anymore because those words would just stick in my head throughout the day. Even when I tried not to have them there, they would be there just repeating themselves over and over again. And I was like, man, I really wish I wasn't thinking that now. And here I am still thinking it. And so I would stop just listening to music with words. Because our imaginations have a tendency to repeat things from the past.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, bring it up over and over again. The things that we find pleasurable and the things that we wish, or the things that were painful, they just come up over and over again. Which is I guess a passive form of imagination, since we were just talking about passivity versus, activity.
Yeah, and that's kind of, the experience I went through in dealing with the ego is that I kept rehashing the same things over and over and over. It became a program, and I just had to step away from that program. Which is interesting because, when we're talking about these, you said programming, like a lot of these films and music and things like that, with the lyrics, and you just don't want to listen to it because it gets stuck in your head. People had to create these things, especially with, content nowadays, like the pop music and the things that kids listen to. I mean, I taught for a while, and I would listen to the music that kids were listening to, like, oh, this sucks. And I would tell them that, and they would actually appreciate it. It's like, your music is terrible. I'm like, oh, yeah, it is. Thanks. I think you need to tell people that, like, your music sucks. And the weird thing, though, is, like, people had to create this stuff. And you can't get into these things where, well, the music industry is massively profitable, billions a year. And so, people are obviously crafting these things to portray a certain message and all that stuff. I mean, we can go down into a deep dark hole on that stuff. And a lot of it is programming, these kids, they want them to be a certain way. A lot of it's to make them dysfunctional. The weird thing is, though, the people that are creating this, as you said before, you're like, well, what you do most of, you get good at. I'm just wondering if these people that create this stuff, if they're so, like, they've drank the juice they're making to the point where they don't even know, like, the reality has become, they've taken that message and that's become part of them. Do you feel that? I don't know. It's just,
I think actually we can come full circle on this and go right back to Tupac. I think he's a perfect example of this. He was a young man who went to art school. He was a poet. He wanted to be an actor. He began to rap, which was a popular art form, or was becoming a popular art form in the early 90s. He was good at it. And then he was in a movie. His first album, though, was mostly about issues in his community. But he then has a role in a movie called Juice, where he plays a bad guy, a gangster. And everyone falls in love with this role he played. He did a great job at playing this role. And in playing this role and having everyone show him appreciation for playing this role, praise for playing this role, which again goes right back to what I was saying about my grandmother praising me as a child, he began to embody that role. His albums progressively become more and more violent and gangster. And then he gets accused of rape. He spends time in prison. He gets out of prison. He's shot repeatedly. And he begins to live a lifestyle that really just isn't him.
Really. And that's because he took on this role.
He took
Um,
one in a row. Yeah.
yeah, wow.
Yeah. It's like he became, I think another great example, at least possibly is a great example, is oh man, what's the guy's name who played he played Joker in one of those Batman films, and then he died from like a drug overdose or something like that.
Heath Ledger.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, Heath Ledger. I think that's another um example where like the role you play or the persona you put on becomes a little too real for you, and maybe takes over. It makes us ask a question that's been asked plenty of times: is it art imitating life, or is it life imitating art? Because then there are other people in music and in film who would say it's the other way around, that they are not influenced by the art so much, but that they are just expressing their lives, how they've lived it, and sharing it with people for good or for bad. Then I guess the question becomes, what's the role of imagination in those types of art forms? Because there really is no idealism there. If I'm writing a song that's just about drugs and money and sex and things like that, really, I'm not asking any questions, nor am I using my imagination. I might be using my imagination in making clever lyrics to portray the message in my song, but there's no idealism unless the ideal is what I'm, the content. My ideal is the content that I'm putting forward. And if that's the case, then we're in a really, really sad situation.
When we so when we go back to, say we're gonna hop in a time machine, and we're gonna go back to 15th century or 16th century Italy. This is one of my most fascinating periods of time for me. I wish I could go back in time and just meet some of these artists,
Mm-hmm.
some of these drafters and stuff, and just talk to them, and just see the world as they saw it. I mean, overall, it was a very spiritually focused civilization,
Mm-hmm.
and very focused on the arts. I mean, I think you wrote an article a while ago about the grand tour of Europe.
Yes, uh-huh.
Yeah, and that was just really interesting because it's just they were so focused on the arts and creativity, and it married spirituality, and that, I don't know. Do you think that's why it bloomed, the creativity? Because right now, or this utilitarian way of thinking is really leading to, I don't know, but I see it as a drought. Some major film companies and stuff like that, like the major ones, they're just rehashing old stuff. We're gonna do a live action this, or okay, let's have zombies. Let's have, and then it's not in, it can only take you so far.
Yeah, yeah.
That shock and stuff like that. I mean, it's all, I don't know. It seems like if we go back in time, where the arts were really focused and spirituality was too. I mean, they took morality seriously and things like that. You couldn't, you made a promise and you kept it, and you worked hard, you worked honestly, you tried to become an honest person, and you tried to live by the code of, then it was Christianity. And do you think that added some depth to it, or is it just, I don't know, what do you think?
I think that Christianity was prevalent in Europe from about 300 AD all the way up until 1400 AD, when the Renaissance started. But yet we don't see the same type of art occur during this time. I think one of the things that happens is that suddenly the ancient art was found again. So in Rome, ancient sculptures were beginning to be unearthed, and they were seeing how the ancient Greeks were making art. Also, ancient texts were all of a sudden rediscovered. So like all of Aristotle's texts were rediscovered, I believe in like the 1300s. So you have all of these new things happening, and the new things are causing people to ask questions. And what they're doing is they're saying, well, we don't want to give up Christianity, but Aristotle isn't a Christian. He knew nothing about Christ. We don't want to give up Christianity, but Plato isn't a Christian. How can we somehow keep the Christian message, but take what's good from these things and live according to them? Because there's a lot good here, and it's our heritage. Like, these people have come from our area. So what does this say about me being an Italian? What does Aristotle say about me being an Italian? What does Plato say about me being an Italian? And what do these things have to do with my history? And so you begin to see paintings with themes of Greek mythology alongside paintings with Christian themes. So again, you have two opposites, really. You have philosophical discourse, which Aristotle is about science and calls himself a scientist, even though I will just leave that there. And then you have Christianity, which believes absolutely in God, in a Trinity. Those two things coalesce in the Renaissance. They come together. They find a way to come together. That's not always the case. There were a couple of uprisings where people thought that it should be one or the other. And then you have the Protestant Reformation that comes about, which says that images shouldn't be created all in God's image, because it's blasphemy and idolatry. And then you have the Catholic Church responding with a counter Reformation, saying, of course, of course there should be images. This is how we allow God's presence to be on earth. And so then we have two extremes again, and these extremes butt up against each other and create a lot of violence and bloodshed. But when those extremes find a way to coalesce, what you have is one of the most creative times in our known history. At least that's where I'm at right now. I could completely be wrong.
I didn't think about it that way. These extremes kind of butting up. So where do you think we're going with all this? Where are we at now?
I posted an article on Facebook not too long ago about I got a lot of backlash for this article, which I thought was unfortunate, because the article talked about a gentleman who had done research that suggested that people or societies that engaged in immoral behavior or conduct, that is traditionally immoral behavior and conduct, indulgences, or like, for instance, the 7 deadly sins, for instance, found that their society or their civilization would fall apart within a certain period of time. And that people who conformed to virtues found that their civilization prospered. I posted it, finding it to be a very interesting article. I got a lot of backlash that said that I was posting something from a colonialist, and that my post suggested that people's rights should be infringed upon, and all kinds of things like that. I found people's responses very interesting, and none of them asked questions about the post, or about why I posted the post, or what I thought about the post. Instead, they took something they did not like about the post, presumed themselves right, and presumed me wrong. And I think that indicates, and you see it all throughout social media, and what it indicates is that people are moving further and further to extremes. And if history teaches us anything about extremes, is that once two extremes go too far to extremes, violence ends up being a result. And I hope that's not the case, but I really don't know because I don't have a say over how things develop. But it seems that that's what we're moving toward. It's some type of at some point these extremes have to settle themselves out. And then after they do, we'll probably ask questions like, how do we rebuild?
Yeah. Yeah, with that, we get to a certain point, like, I don't know, if you think of life as like a classroom, it's a learning process and all that stuff. And you take the lessons we're learning now, it's usually, after we take the test and we look in hindsight, we can be like, oh, well, that was really simple. All we had to do was to change this one little thing. I don't know. It seems like we're gonna have to write it out, and then after this fact, whatever might be that intermediary between where we're at now and then after the fact, we're gonna look back and like, the answer is extremely simple.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is, but it's just, I think that's what's gonna happen. We're like, oh, we were so stupid. It's just like, why? The answer was like, it's so obvious. And it's just kind of like we're stuck in this loop right now. And as you said before, repeating things over and over. I think, with the films and arts and everything like that, it's also going on in our minds. We're just still stuck in that's these cycles of trauma over and over and over and over and over. and we might need an external force to push us, gently into something where we can take a step back, and then we look and like, oh, okay, oops. we made that mistake, which is okay. It's okay. We made a mistake. That's part of life, and that's how we grow. It's like we're in a classroom, teach us, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's just my thoughts, but I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I also think though that at least in the West, we are so comfortable. Even me, and as we established at the beginning of this conversation, I do not make money. But I'm still as far as just material things are considered, I'm a pretty comfortable person. I'm not homeless. I don't starve or anything like that. I live a pretty comfortable life. And I think that on top of the fact that we are distracted by so many images, so much music, so much entertainment, that it's going to take something in order for us to get out of this cycle. It's going to take something just devastating,
like losing the internet for a little while.
I think it would have to even be like,
just like, I can't get on my phone.
I thought that initially this pandemic would be something that would sort of strike people, but it has not had the effect that I thought it would.
Yeah, I mean, see, I thought it was going to change people. It was like, nah.
Yeah, no, people are going about life as usual, and which is fine, but I think it just goes back to how comfortable we feel with ourselves and with just being where we are. A lot of us are pretty comfortable. We're so comfortable that we'll just continue to live life as normal, even though there's a lot of caution as far as the pandemic is concerned. But I think it's going to take something that really just makes people go like, wow, like that happened, or like that was happening, like I unintentionally had a part in it, or I think it's going to, something brutal would have to happen that made people question themselves in a very deep way.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is, you look in China right now. under this totalitarian rule. Like, are people like Christianity is just like blooming like crazy, like spirituality in general, even under this totalitarian rule, even under threat of death. Like in Hong Kong, even these students and just people in general in that society, they're like risking their lives for just basic to say no to I mean, I'm labeling, the Communist Party evil, but they're saying no to that evil.
Mm-hmm.
And they're risking their lives, and some people's friends are getting thrown in prison and they're disappearing, and they're like, they feel guilty because they're not in there too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, wow, that intensity, that spirit. And maybe you're right. Yeah, maybe it's just here in the West, we've had all these freedoms and everything, and I don't know. Yeah, it's just, yeah, life is kind of, maybe we're in that lukewarm kind of thing where maybe it is just too materially focused. Because I don't know. It's just, do we need like a massive event, or do you think we just need to make that shift internally somehow? Do you think we need something to get us to that point, or is it maybe we can sidestep and just, yeah, I don't know. Sorry. I was just thinking, maybe it is just one simple little just smaller adjustments as we go along. I don't know. It's just, there's this, okay, when communism first was forming in Europe, in Western Europe, and then it went to Russia and then Soviet Union and all that stuff. I think it was around World War One. In China, there was a little experiment there. There was this small town where they had this like commune, and they said, well, it was kind of like the materialistic, atheistic, utopian society, and it collapsed within weeks. It just went poof. And I think that's an example of, I think it points to the necessity for spirit, whatever it is, like the spirit. Maybe we just need to make that a focus. I think if enough people do that, or there's enough content out there that does that, that'll make that shift. I don't know.
I think you may be right. I think one of the issues, I think, is that you would need to have enough of that type of content competing with the already mass amount of content that people expose themselves to on a daily basis. So there would have to be an extreme increase in that type of content with spirit. Otherwise, people will do kind of like, and this isn't to attack Christianity or anything like that, but I know a lot of people who practice Christianity, and none of them, they call themselves Christians, but none of them read their Bible. A lot of them don't go to church. And their belief is that, well, I believe in God and therefore I'm a Christian. But they don't really cultivate themselves as Christians, nor do they practice anything that has anything to do with Christianity. They've comforted themselves with this belief so that they can just go off and be distracted by the things of the world. And I think that there's a danger in that. If there isn't enough content with spirit in one's life, then there's no way they'll be able to make those small adjustments of their own will, unless something around them causes them enough depression so that they go deep enough into their own abyss and question how they're living their lives. And if they see their own actions as the cause of their depression, or their ego as a cause of their depression, then they'll begin to question those things and change their perspective and their actions so that they don't have to feel that anymore. Outside of that, though, it's seeming like it's going to take a lot more for people to be like, you know what, maybe what I'm doing isn't the best, or maybe I should change my approach to life, or like we live in interesting times where, like, on social media, I can post a funny meme, which I never do, but I can post a funny meme and get, hundreds of likes on it. And I can post a documentary about the very thing you just talked about, like totalitarian communist China persecuting religious groups, and no one likes it. That's very telling to me. And it may not even be that no one's interested. There may even be people like, oh, that looks interesting, I want to watch it. But they see the content above and below that post, and they continue to scroll. There's just so much competing information, most of it irrelevant.
Yeah, this reminds me of, if you ever played the Civilization PC game.
No.
Yeah, well, in it, these wonders you can get, and the mass media is like this really big buffering one. If you can get mass media, you're like set. Like your civilization is just gonna take off. It's because it's just so important.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of like, yeah, I don't know, that might be it. Just like the media people consume, it's just that passivity, I think, with what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
yeah, I think I think the thin line between media being the propaganda of an extreme, which isn't creative at all, and media being the propaganda of creativity. But then this causes, we'd have to ask a lot of questions, like, well, what is creativity? And what would be the problems of the propaganda of an extreme? Which there's a lot of historical examples of that. But this requires to ask, we would have to ask a lot of questions. If creativity warrants something like censorship, because we were just talking about, like, the content of songs and film and things like that, and how they seem to have reached an extreme in their content and their inability to create new subject matter that's interesting and compelling, that gets us to think about ourselves and how we're living and moving throughout our lives in the world. But it also, I lost my train of thought.
That's all right. Yeah, so I guess, well, it's I guess we can stop there.
Okay.
Yeah, we can end on that note. Yeah, well, we covered we talked about a lot, so
yeah, we did.
Yeah. Well, thanks for hopping on. I mean, I wanted to talk a little bit more about imagination and just ideals, but maybe for another day we just get going. But yeah, it's just really interesting, some of the concepts you put out there, just how to, just focusing on, the question, questions are important. Questions are okay. It's okay to be wrong. All right. So anyways, Eric, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. And I'll see you again, hopefully sometime soon.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.